I'm going to keep this very brief because you've had a day already of presentations. But just to give a flavour of what we do in terms of learning in the library, these are the galleries. If some of you may not have been upstairs, but I'm assuming most people have. But in terms of what we have on display, we have two galleries, the sacred traditions on the second floor, and then the arts of the book on the first floor. And you'll notice there are no solid walls between each of the sections, the Islamic, East Asian and European. That primarily is to reflect the flow between each of the collections, both commonalities as well as differences. And you'll see various themes, as I mentioned, the sacred traditions, and then the arts of the book that's found right across the collections. And I think that really reflects the cultural diversity of what we've been touching on today. And based on these collections and our mission statement, our learning programs always start from the collections. And I've been here since January 2000. I started here a month before the library opened. And as an educator, it was a huge challenge because my education was never in Islamic or East Asian art. It was primarily Western art, because to this day, really, in the Irish education system, European art is the main theme that's taught in the education system. So I had to learn from the very beginning, and I'm still learning. But over time, and I suppose the commitment to engaging with our local communities is reflected in the programs that we offer, which are, I won't read it out, but you can see it's quite varied. So we look at all different types of learning, from formal to informal. This is just an example of a local Turkish couturier, Ahmet Kutluk, and we had a fashion show here 2 years ago as a direct response to our costume parisienne, the French fashion plates. So we're always trying to find common connections between our local community as well as the collections that we have here on display. So it was the very first fashion show we had in the history of the library since relocating here. Absolutely beautiful clothes as well. Fionnuala touched on this today. We have been exploring different faiths pretty much from the outset since we reopened here. And it's been a continuous conversation, particularly in the secondary school system. And we have kidnapped the National Council of Curriculum Assessment next week for 2 hours in the biggest teacher training college called Mary Immaculate College. And Mary Immaculate is a very good giveaway about the ethos of this teacher training college. It was critiqued by the former Minister of Education, Murray Quinn. He said the ethos was too Roman Catholic. And in recognition of this, we co-developed this learning resource with the Inclusion and Diversity Services in Northern Ireland, who provide support for primary and post-primary schools in the six regions. And ways of seeing, there's a free copy for everybody in the audience as well today. We're going to work with the NCCA, who are developing a new curriculum in religion, and we're going to incubate them for 2 hours with this resource. And we were going to prototype handling box around the Islamic collections, but we're going to look at world religions through the lens of the Chester Beatty Library and the Ulster Museum, because they were our partner in the project. We have a new lab. It's 2 years old. It's Chester Beatty's Creative Lab for Teams, because we believe in experimentation, in prototyping and creativity and innovation. And our teams are as diverse as our collections, and they're here in our schools. They're present in our current education system, but are they being acknowledged through our current education system? And I don't think they are, but things are beginning to change very, very slowly. The one thing about our Creative Lab is that it doesn't reflect the education system, the formal education system. We provide a platform for experimentation, creativity, innovation. I said that already, but as you can see, they're there, they're learning, they're using that's very hands-on, and they're working with our local maker community. Those who are out there experimenting, sharing their ideas through engineering, technology, arts, crafts and so on. That's reflective of a European project that we're involved in called the Creative Museum, that's funded by Erasmus+. And it's a training program for both museum professionals as well as, I suppose, the people we engage with through our programs, that being our teens at the moment. But we'd like that to spread out into the rest of our public programs. And I suppose that's the ethos of the Creative Museum. I won't read it out because I'm running out of time and I need to give Alan some time as well. We have a new education blog, and Pat very kindly referred to our strategy earlier on, and this is reflective of our strategy. And as you can see, some people's faces from the audience are up there today. And that's just a way of showcasing and sharing our resources and what we do and what's available through the public programme and for the general public. Adult learning is really important as well, and Justina here is not only our education assistant, but she's also our volunteer coordinator and runs a very active programme for our volunteers as well as the public programme, because adult learning is at the heart of what we do when it comes to providing guided tours, visitor services and other activities, and they play a very important role here in the library. Fionnuala touched on community ambassadors, because we really do believe our community ambassadors build that bridge between the museum and the community, the direct community. That has taken time. It didn't happen overnight. And there's a lot of input from our community ambassadors in the programme, down to the actual flyers and the posters that we develop from a language point of view. And there's a free cup of tea or coffee for each of the tours as well, which is a big incentive for our communities. And then most importantly, we did a training session, Justina and myself, last summer in the National Museum in Collins Barracks with the IMA. I don't know if Gina's here, and the National Museum. Yes, no, yes. And we were given this opportunity to hold a training session looking at cultural diversity, and we invited all our practitioners to explore cultural diversity within the Irish context, and that actually fed into what we're going to do today with Alan and myself for the workshop, and that paper will be published in the IMA Journal for 2015. And that's it, that's me, that's us in a nutshell. So I'm going to pass you over to Alan. Sorry, Alan, where are you? Yeah.
So just to explain, I'm the education coordinator at the House of European History, which is scheduled to open this November in Brussels. I don't know, some of you may have heard about it, some may have not heard, but it's a project that was inaugurated in 2007 by the European Parliament. So it is under the umbrella or auspices of the European Parliament, but separate from it. It is obviously funding it. And in 2007, the former president of the European Parliament, Hans-Gert Pottering, decided that it was time that the EU institutions across the board they've always dealt with economic and political history since their foundations, but what about the role of culture, which is important to all European peoples? And they felt that maybe, you notice the word museum is not used in the title. This was something public feedback across the continent felt house was something that was more approachable, and it was softer, a nicer term, but essentially it is still a museum, but wording is important for the visitor. So it was launched in 2007, and over the course of the following years, an academic committee was appointed of senior historians from across Europe, north, south, east and west, to guide the principles of the museum, but also to create I suppose you might say, a buffer zone between the MEPs and the overt political institution that is the Parliament, and the thematics or the elements that you would find within the museum itself. And an academic project team was then put together, such as myself and the team of educators who I would work with, along with the content staff and the conservators, to look at this future museum. It will actually be in a park in the centre of Brussels, Park Leopold, not of awful Leopold II fame, a different Leopold, I'm happy to say, and the Congo. But it's in what was formerly the George Eastman. George Eastman was an American philanthropist, and he opened in the 1930s a series of dental clinics for poverty-stricken children across Europe, and there's one in London, and very much all built to type. So you see a sense of it here. And this building has now currently been fully restored, and it does look quite fantastic after the refurbishment that it's been through. I gave tours of it just 2 weeks ago to some other educators and people who wanted to see what was happening. These are just some shots of the interior. It doesn't actually have a collection of its own, so therefore this is an important element for a museum. A call out went to museums across Europe of objects that might help with the narratives that the museum has developed, and they have come back exceptionally strongly in what they want to loan and give to the museum. So you have a situation where the House of European History will have objects from collections across Europe, but also it will purchase key objects or ephemera or pieces that it wants to always have on site that will be important. Here it says a contemporary museum. This is critical. It puts the contemporary first, the history as a supporting. It's always to look at what impact has history had on today. This is what it looks at. So a bit like in the earlier talks that you had, particularly with Peter talking this morning, that it's going to look from the point of the beginning of nationalism. Its starting point is roughly after the French Revolution, the past key 200 years of European history. And it looks at that. I should tell you what it is and what it's not. What it certainly is not will be a museum about the development of the European Parliament or the Commission. It already has a visitor centre which does this. This is not its purpose. It's also not going to be a history of all of the 28 member states. National histories are not its focus. Now, you might wonder how something like that would occur in a museum, but actually, in looking at the histories, shared history was used, Elizabeth has used the term, it is more so looking at this key phenomena across the continent that actually combined or was shared by European experience over the past 200 years. Here I just show you a selection, over 300 museums visit and 300 objects, 3,000 objects that have been already promised. The permanent exhibition will be across 6 floors, and it's not so much telling or a new curriculum of what a European identity or history should be. It's not an answer, it's more of a question. And for instance, I can tell you the very first floor that the visitor will experience, called Shaping Europe, you will come across the myth of Europa, which is quite interesting. Europa herself is Phoenician, so even the name Europe is questioned and thrown into debate. It questions the geographical landmass of Europe itself, what it's meant to be. And then it moves from that up through all the floors in a chronological thematic structure to explore Eastern Europeans' interconnection with the West, and elements like this. Sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. These are just some renders to give you a sense of what the interiors will look like. Obviously, these have moved on a bit since these were created. But this, for instance, is the Shaping Europe floor. So you will have a large audiovisual that you will encounter that will give you a widespread span back through centuries, even though the core focus is the past 200 years. You will have then Mapping Europe in the centre, Myth of Europa to the left, and then some key concepts that are seen to connect to European history on the right-hand side, such as things like quite controversial in some instances, genocide, colonialism, human rights, democracy, and religions. So all this. This is the 19th century galleries, which will bring you right through. These are large AVs on the left that you see, and objects across the continent again, placed beside each other to show how different Europeans at different times, different experiences, but yet in many ways shared a sense of these experiences that could have been quite traumatic. 19th century still with a steam hammer and Karl Marx beside it. This is the colonialism gallery, and colonialism on the right-hand side, and then science and technology on the left. And essentially how it tries to work through the spaces with these thematics are wide over-ranging themes that I have had to try to incorporate across the floors in the education program. And this is kind of to give you a sense of how difficult it could be. From an educational perspective, if you think of all the national curriculums in every member state, it's impossible to do that. Jenny touched a bit on what the Chester Beatty has done for the Irish curriculum, but at the House of European History, we cannot do that. So it has to more function as a thematic way, a bit like slightly we saw in the Asian civilizations presentation. So these are the topics that will be used very much in the education programs, but also on the floors. And you can see how all of them very much have a relevance for today still, but yet, because of the past, can be explored from their origin point and traced from that. So we took the idea of the workshop. What we want to do today, what we're now about to do, is the idea of identity and migration. These are the two we've pulled out from the House of European History to use, and that Jenny wants to use here as well. And we thought it would be quite nice to break who is taking part in the workshop into 4 groups. I've brought some resources from the House of European History, posters, photographs, ephemera, letters. Jenny also has some images of objects here in the collections. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to set you a task, a project brief essentially, in the time that we have left. In that the key question is, it's like Hajra Sheikh had mentioned before, the cultural commentator, formerly education officer at the V&A, said that if a museum or a collection doesn't have the objects in a collection, does that mean you can't handle or deal with the topics, or that you can't work with that? And what we thought for this workshop would be interesting is that for Irish museums, in the Irish context, the Chester Beatty has a fantastic array of objects here that reflect diversity. And is it possible to work on a thematic structure in your museum, be if you're in Northern Ireland, in the southernmost tip of Kerry, and you feel that how can you talk about diversity?